The first half of this class is referred to, or the title of this class is referred to as Homeland Security and Counterterrorism. In the last section, we covered, or attempted to cover, what exactly is Homeland Security intelligence. What we are going to examine today is the second half of the title of our course, What is Counterterrorism? Not everything that is done to combat terrorism ordinarily is labeled counterterrorism. However, anything that cuts the roots or attempts to confront the causes of terrorism should be viewed at least in part to be a counterterrorism measure. Counterterrorism as a concerted and cooperative effort by governments to combat this tactic is not old, but it long predates any war on terror aimed at Islamic fundamentalist variety of international terror that is the focus of most of our attention today. What could be called the first international conference on counterterrorism took place in Rome in 1898 to deal with the wave of anarchist assassinations and other attacks that were occurring worldwide. Interest in counterterrorism, both among government agencies and the public, has increased and decreased in modern time. These patterns partly reflect the rise and demise of different types of terrorist threats, such as the anarchist threat in the late 1880s and the threat from leftist groups in Europe during the late 1960s and 70s. Interestingly, while there was a leftist threat in the U.S. as demonstrated by various successful attacks during the 1960s and 70s, the American public was not concerned with counterterrorism. This could be contributed to a number of political scandals involving both the intelligence community and law enforcement, and as a result, the public feared the government more than any other terrorist organization. What this does illustrate is that counterterrorism is usually reactionary, meaning that it tends to be viewed as a high priority by both the public and politicians after a specific incident or series of incidents. While counterterrorism requires an awareness in such swings in public mood and attention, it also requires focusing in on the essential elements and issues of counterterrorism that are present regardless of the political environment. After all, it will be those charged with counterterrorism that will be blamed when an attack does occur. Scholars and politicians have often called for counterterrorism strategies that address the root cause of terrorism. There are many theories about what causes terrorism and individuals to enter into terrorism in academia and between academia and policymakers. As a result, governments may promote political or social changes that will weaken what it regards as root causes or engage in a battle of ideas with extremist ideologies. This can be attempted abroad, as the U.S. has tried to do in combating the appeal of Islamic extremism, or at home, as many European nations have tried to do with their Muslim populations. Neither approach appears to be very successful. One need to look no farther than Iraq and Afghanistan today as examples to the U.S. success with this approach, or lack thereof. In terms of looking inward at the domestic population, especially among the first and second generation Muslim populations in Europe, there have been two approaches taken. Britain has taken the multicultural approach to handle their diverse population and try and allow them to practice their religion without assimilation, while France has taken the assimilation strategy, trying to bring these diverse communities into the French system and observe French culture and customs. Neither approach has proved successful in reducing the numbers of people gravitating towards extremism or extremist ideologies, as illustrated by numerous attacks in that area, in those countries rather. Even when disenfranchised populations seek social or political change, providing incentives for peaceful solutions towards grievances may not be realistic. This is especially true when dealing with groups like Al-Qaeda and its affiliates, whose ultimate goal is to overthrow most of the political institutions of the Muslim world and other realistic goals. As you see in this map here, this is what bin Laden's notion of the caliphate is. He believes that all lands highlighted within the red circle or the red lines are part of the Muslim caliphate and should be controlled by the caliphate and ruled under Sharia Islamic law. While this macro approach to counterterrorism may be well-meaning and may help address the issues in the long term, it does little to deal with the immediate real threat of terrorism. You need to take a more here and now approach to counterterrorism. Strategies can be divided. These more realistic direct approaches can be divided into two categories: defensive and offensive. These strategies seek to curb the abilities of terrorists to attack at a given time. Defensive measures seek to protect potential targets from attack. Offensive measures seek to reduce terrorist capability to attack. One defensive measure could be described as, and security measures exist on various levels. The first level of security measures could be called the individual measure that could include a specific site or individuals. Specific sites could include government buildings, military bases, embassies, or a wide variety of businesses within the private sector that are symbolic or strategic locations. A site can also be a high-profile event, such as the World Cup or the Super Bowl, which requires short-term protection. Just as an event can be high-profile, so can an individual. Like many physical locations, government leaders and other prominent people have symbolic or strategic value to terrorist organizations and requires personal security. The next level of security could be described as system security, in which an entire sector or network is a target that needs protection. The best example of system-level security is the civil aviation sector. The mobility, vulnerability, and global nature of commercial aviation industry makes it an attractive target. Protecting the entire system usually requires a layer approach to security so that lapses of security in one area can be picked up elsewhere in the system. In the case of the aviation system, this includes passenger screening, baggage check, and hardening cockpit doors, to name just a few. This layered approach to security has been implemented in a variety of other industries, such as public transportation, mass transit, and the electrical power grid. The last level of security is protecting an entire country by keeping terrorists and their tools of terror outside the country's border. Particular attention in this area is given to weapons of mass destruction. The approach at this level of security varies greatly from country to country based on a variety of political, social, economic, and the geography of a nation. For example, many European countries, especially those within the European Union, allow for the free border crossings with neighboring countries, whereas the United States does not allow for free movement across its borders and is protected by two oceans, thus requiring two different strategies to protect the countries from outside threats. Security measures hope to make it more difficult for terrorist attacks to be carried out successfully against what is protected. The result is that terrorists may abandon their plans if they judge that success is not likely. This does not mean that they will necessarily give up terrorism. Rather, it means they will not be able to hit their primary target and need to find an alternative. It may also force them to alter their operational plans, which may include increasing risk-taking and lengthening the time for their attack, both of which increase the chances of detection and apprehension. Security measures at all levels require that terrorists gather intelligence on potential targets to assess security measures. This includes gathering substantial information about the target, including surveillance to identify vulnerabilities, possible avenues for attack, and assessing security measures. The need for terrorists to gather intelligence brings us to our next defensive measure: counterterrorism. Traditionally, counterterrorism refers to efforts taken to protect one's own intelligence and security operations from penetration and disrupting by hostile nation or their security services. The new reality is that non-state actors now engage in intelligence collection on sites or individuals that are potential targets. The main objective of counterintelligence operations are to gain information about an adversary's intelligence collection ability, thwart efforts of your adversary to penetrate or gather information on the targeted organization. After identifying potential adversaries, trying to collect intelligence on them, trying to flip them or feed them false information. One of the main problems with counterintelligence as a defensive strategy is that many potential targets are in the private sector. This means that there are financial and legal limitations on what counterintelligence steps can be taken. For example, investigation into a potential employee's background is greatly limited in the private sector versus the public sector. This can make it easier for a potential adversary to plant an operative inside a private organization to gather intelligence on a potential target. However, if detected, counterintelligence methods can be employed whether in the private or public sector. This is where counterintelligence can lead to offensive measures of counterterrorism that we will discuss later. The truth is that everything can't be protected all the time, even though everything is a potential target. This gives terrorists a distinct tactical advantage, which means another attack will occur in the future regardless of our best efforts. This brings us to our final defensive measure: incident management. Incident management is anything one does when a terrorist attack occurs or is ongoing. One example of incident management is a hostage situation. In a hostage situation, incident management may include weakening the resolve of terrorists, managing communications with the public and the press, and developing and executing a rescue plan. In all these approaches to incident management in a hostage situation, the goal is to rescue the hostages and capture the terrorists. However, in most cases, the advantage is with the terrorists because they have the ability to inflict immediate harm on hostages. In recent years, major terrorist incidents have not involved the seizure of hostages, but instead direct and unprovoked killing of innocent people either with bombs or armed assaults, as seen in several bombings in the UK and seen at a mall in Kenya, as well as the attack on Mumbai and several other incidents that have been in the news over recent years. In these cases, incident management is more about emergency response, designed to tend to the wounded and deal with any continuing hazards and begin an investigation. When it comes to incident management, most mitigation efforts have focused on the use of weapons of mass destruction. Despite the rarity of such events, the possibility resulting seem to lend an emphasis on putting attention on those type of attacks. One attack using a weapon of mass destruction would have devastating effects. And as stated earlier, when it comes to defensive measures, terrorists have the advantage of picking who, what, when, and where to attack. Even with something as complex as weapons of mass destruction, if terrorists were able to get a hold of such a weapon and deploy it, they would have a tactical advantage, and the results would be devastating, which leads to why so much attention is put into emergency response and incident response to such a attack. Offensive measures, however, give the advantage of counterterrorism efforts to the protector, as they get to choose the parameters of the conflict. Successful offensive counterterrorist operations prevent an attack before it can occur and take terrorists out of the business, thus preventing them from carrying out any attacks in the future. This is not to say offensive counterterrorism methods are an alternative to defensive measures, but rather each approach complements the other. Offensive counterterrorism measures also use several different approaches that complement each other. The first approach is diplomacy. not with terrorists, but with other potential targets. Diplomacy is important because it enlists the cooperation of other governments, and which is crucial to counterterrorism operations that cross international boundaries. On its most basic level, diplomacy may mean obtaining cooperation from others on a specific case, such as getting a foreign government to arrest a suspect or raid a specific location. Diplomacy can also help drive and guide cooperation much more generally between military, security, and intelligence services of various countries. Finally, multilateral diplomacy is useful in creating a global climate that recognizes terrorism as a shared problem and supports one's own counterterrorism efforts. An example of diplomatic counterterrorism measures that have involved all three levels of diplomacy is the disruption of finances of terrorists and their organizations. This has been in the form of freezing or seizing assets. The idea is that money is the lifeblood of terrorists, and getting to it and limiting their ability to effectively plan out operations or attacks, because without money they cannot pay for it. Countries have worked together both on specific cases and creating an environment of cooperation where bank accounts and assets in multiple countries have been coordinated to be frozen at the same time, thus cutting off this lifeblood to terrorist organizations. Another offensive counterterrorism method is intelligence. Intelligence itself will be covered in great detail throughout this course. However, it is important to point out here that the goal of intelligence, such as counterterrorism measures, is to uncover enough tactical details about a plot so that it can be stopped before it is executed. Intelligence also serves three other counterterrorism functions. These include, first, providing a more strategic sense of the terrorist threat. Is it increasing or decreasing? Which groups pose the greatest threat? Which areas of operation are of most concern? 2. Supply support to other counterterrorism methods, both offensive and defensive. And third, collect and analyze information on terrorist organizations and their infrastructure. This is not plot-specific information, but rather information such as biographical data, location of terrorist cells, and safe houses, and the connections between terrorists and their groups. Like counterintelligence, intelligence may lead to offensive measures of counterterrorism. Such specifically are the next two types of offensive measures: law enforcement and military force. Intelligence provides leads for the collection of more information, which in turn facilitates the disruption of terrorist organizations' infrastructure. Intelligence when successful, usually do not grab headlines unless successful actions is taken against a well-known terrorist, such as Osama bin Laden. But other type of intelligence successes account for the largest proportion of counterterrorism successes. However, intelligence agencies are usually separated from law enforcement and military forces and rely on these two offensive weapons to act on the intelligence they supply. Law enforcement is most effective when it is able to be conducted as a constructive investigation on an ongoing plot. Here the goal is to gather enough information to secure a criminal conviction against the plotters while also preventing an attack from occurring. It may also provide leads to other individuals not previously known or other attacks being planned. The challenge with these types of investigations is knowing when enough evidence has been collected to successfully prosecute subjects, or if all information on the tactical use to prevent other plots have been gathered, while at the same time trying to prevent a successful attack from occurring. Law enforcement as a counterterrorism tool has significant limitations. First, a terrorist has to be caught before he can be prosecuted. High-level leaders who are directing the plot are rarely among the foot soldiers carrying out the plot. A legal case against a subject and proving guilt beyond a reasonable doubt is much more difficult than building an intelligence case. If a terrorist moves across international borders, a question of jurisdiction may arise, and another country may not be willing to arrest or surrender a subject. This is especially a problem in the issue of state-directed terrorism. Finally, a terror suspect may use his trial as a platform to spread propaganda in favor of his cause to gain sympathy. When law enforcement measures are not viable, especially because of the foreign nature of the terrorist threat, military action may be the most efficient counterterrorism method. Military action may be overt, meaning that those carrying out the actions are known or take responsibility, or covert, where the action cannot be attributed to anyone in particular or is not acknowledged publicly. Military action can be large-scale, such as the invasion of a foreign country, as we saw in Afghanistan or Iraq, to small operations targeting specific individuals, such as those using unmanned aerial vehicles. The strength of targeted military strikes is that it can quickly and dramatically take out a target, as opposed to a drawn-out, lengthy trial in law enforcement action. They can be used to immediately destroy or disrupt a terrorist's capabilities by hitting such things as training camps, safe houses, or key operatives in other countries. They can be carried out without the administrative, evidentiary, or legal complications associated with a trial. The drawback on military action is it is inherently destructive in nature. Collateral damage, including losing the loss of innocent lives, is also inevitable. This can serve to alienate the population in both the target country and those countries who are carrying out such attacks. In the case of large-scale action in a foreign country, can often end up in a long, drawn-out campaign with unintended consequences, as we have seen in Afghanistan and Iraq. Offensive counterterrorism methods have some common drawbacks as well. Military action and law enforcement action may provoke further attacks, either as revenge or, in the case of terrorists being detained, hostage-taking and trying to gain the release of these detainees. The treatment of suspected terrorists has also been a focus of controversy over human rights and the idea that even the guilty should be treated humanely. Other issues of concern is innocent people being detained or killed, the use of secret prisons in foreign countries, rendition, and indefinite detention of suspects, to name just a few of the controversial issues. Defensive measures as a whole are not free from drawbacks or controversy either. Several limitations, most obviously is that they are expensive, not just in terms of cost and direct monetary expenditures, but also that they often cause unavoidable inefficiencies on the people being protected and a higher cost of doing business. There is also a conflict between counterterrorism measures and societal values such as liberty and privacy. Liberty is curtailed every time one is denied access to a formal public place in the interest of security, or is forced to empty their pockets and go through metal detectors. Privacy is compromised when government agencies collect and exploit financial, travel, or other data on individuals in hopes of identifying terrorists. Terrorists are well aware of these social values and use our openness and freedom to their advantage. This makes intelligence and counterterrorism methods all the more important. The true challenge lays in striking a balance between being safe from terrorism, as well as preserving these values of privacy and liberty. Where does that line lie? The variety of positions are as varied as the different goals and ideologies of terrorist organizations around the world.